Why did the room fall so quiet the moment she walked in? No one knew, not yet. The operations tent was a furnace of noise moments before, maps rustling, boots scuffing plywood, radios crackling with static that smelled like tension. Then she stepped inside and it all died. Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres. Small, silent, too still for a war zone. She didn't look like the kind of legend men whispered about. She looked ordinary. That somehow made it worse. A cluster of Navy SEALs leaned back in their chairs, lazy grins spreading under the yellow light. "That's her," one muttered. "That's the one they've been talking about." Laughter bubbled like static before a storm. At the far end of the room, General Marcus Steele watched without moving. 30 years in uniform, dozens of campaigns. He could read a room the way a sniper reads wind, and he didn't like what he saw. Whispers had weight, legends had gravity, both could pull soldiers apart. He believed in discipline, not myth. Steele's hands pressed flat on the briefing table. The sound thud cut through the murmurs. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Attention!" Every man stood. Every voice vanished. He studied her across the distance. The face of a ghost, they said. The one they called something, something half forbidden in the field reports. He wanted to see it for himself. "Step forward," he ordered. Torres obeyed. Her stride was steady, deliberate, the kind of calm that unnerves even the brave. Boots clicked once, twice, then stopped in front of him. "Name, unit." The words were sharp, designed to cut hesitation. "Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres, 1st Recon, sir." Her tone was neutral, no tremor. Steele nodded once. Textbook controlled, forgettable. But something about the stillness around her said otherwise. Even the SEALs, who'd laughed moments ago, sat straighter now. They didn't know why. Steele's voice dropped lower. "Not good enough." The air thickened. Men exchanged glances. He wasn't asking for protocol. He was asking for truth. "Call sign." That word hit the room like an incoming round. Whispers turned to silence. Boots stopped shifting. Someone swallowed hard. Everyone knew the story. They just didn't believe it. Torres didn't blink. Her face didn't flinch. She had lived this moment before in other tents, under other lights, with other men doubting her. Her chin lifted slightly. "Specter 6. The syllables were clean, sharp, final. And just like that, silence. Real silence. The kind that made men forget to breathe. General Steele froze. He had seen that name before, in sealed files stamped classified and buried under dust. Reports written in fragments, redacted, unbelievable. He dismissed them as ghost stories soldiers tell to make sense of survival. But now the myth stood in front of him, breathing the same air. Around the room, every Marine felt the weight settle. The jokes died first, then the smirks. All that remained was awe and maybe fear. "Specter 6, Steele repeated quietly, almost to himself. The words tasted metallic. He didn't like it. He'd seen men crumble under names they didn't deserve. He'd seen heroes built from propaganda, then buried under the truth. But this was different. The silence told him so. Torres stood motionless, not proud, not defiant, just still. She said her name, and that was enough. A SEAL near the back whispered, "No wonder they're alive." His voice didn't carry far, but it didn't need to. The words spread anyway, quiet as smoke. Men remembered stories of firefights gone wrong, of units pinned down in alleys where no one should have lived. But someone had lived, someone had brought them all back. And every one of those reports had the same signature, Specter 6, unverified. Now the verification stood 5 feet away, wearing dust and discipline. Steele didn't move for a long time. Then slowly he straightened. He stepped forward until the distance between them disappeared. "You understand what you've just done, Sergeant?" Torres didn't look away. Yes, sir. His jaw flexed. Legends break men. When Marines believe you can't fall, they'll follow you into hell and die trying. You make them think you're invincible and they stop fearing death. That's how units collapse. His words were harsh, deliberate, the kind that peel back armor. Torres didn't blink. I won't break, sir. Her tone wasn't arrogance, it was truth. Cold, simple, unmovable. The room went still again. No generator hum, no cough, not even a breath. Every man waited for steel to tear her down. But he didn't. He just stared at her, long enough to see what most couldn't. Behind the calm was exhaustion. Behind the certainty, the quiet ache of someone who'd carried too many ghosts already. Steele exhaled through his nose. You think it's that easy? I don't think, sir. I know. How that? My Marines are alive because I don't. The response hit the room like a concussion wave. Short, raw, irrefutable. A younger officer looked from her to the general, waiting for him to explode. He didn't. Because somewhere in those words, Steele heard something rare, conviction without ego. Finally he spoke again, voice lower, measured. Very well, Specter 6. He turned away, but the sound of the call sign lingered. It wasn't rumor anymore, it was fact. And it changed the air inside that tent forever. Then the flap burst open. A young lieutenant stumbled in, face pale, folder clutched tight. He slammed it on the table. Recon Bravo's gone dark, sir. Every head turned. Steele snatched the report, eyes scanning fast. Last contact 20 minutes ago, outskirts of Kabul, no comms, high probability of ambush. A ripple ran through the room. Gone dark meant surrounded, outnumbered, already dead. Steele looked up, his gaze sharp as broken glass. Sergeant Torres. Yes, sir. You're on point. The words fell heavy. No debate, no hesitation, just orders. Torres nodded once. Yes, sir. Around her boots shuffled, weapons checked, faces hardening. The SEALs who'd laughed before said nothing now. They just watched her, silently adjusting their gear. Outside, the Afghan night waited, black, cold, endless. The air smelled of dust and diesel. The sound of engines rolled like distant thunder. The convoy rolled out under red lights, no headlights, no chatter. Just the rumble of tires and the weight of silence. Inside the lead Humvee, Torres sat near the door, eyes closed. It wasn't rest, it was calculation. Every firefight in Kabul had rhythm, every trap had pattern. She saw them before they happened. The driver glanced at her reflection in the window. You really think they're alive out there? She opened her eyes. They're Marines, they're alive until I say otherwise. He didn't ask again. The radio crackled. Steele's voice came through, flat and calm. Specter 6, lead them in. The words carried weight. For the first time in years, Steele sounded like he believed in something again. Torres raised her hand in signal. The convoy slowed, stopped. Boots hit dirt. The city stretched before them. Alleys, broken walls, doorways full of shadows. She raised her fist. Positions. Her voice was low, steady, not a command but a promise. They moved, SEALs to the flanks, Marines forward. Every corner felt like a heartbeat. Then came the first shot. A Marine dropped, screaming, his brothers dragging him behind a broken wall. Gunfire erupted, rooftops, windows, alleys all at once. The city came alive with muzzle flashes. Contact left, top right, someone shouted. Bullets shattered stone inches from Tor's head. Dust exploded in her face. She dropped low, pressing against the wall, scanning angles, reading the chaos like a map. Every soldier was firing blind, trapped in the kill zone. She whispered, "Cover me." No one argued. She sprinted forward, Low, fast, deliberate. Climbed the collapsed wall, fingers bleeding against the jagged brick. Bullet snapped past her, slicing air. She rolled over the edge, landed behind the first sniper team. One shot. Two. Three. Each round precise, surgical. She moved like smoke, vanishing, reappearing, cutting through the night. 12 firing points went dark, one by one. Below, the Marines felt the shift. The incoming fire faltered. Confusion rippled through the enemy lines. A SEAL looked up and caught a glimpse of her silhouette against the skyline. Silent, efficient, unstoppable. "She's clearing them," he muttered. And then the tide turned. "Push left, move now," a Marine shouted. They surged forward, dragging the wounded, covering each other, moving through the gaps she'd carved open. Torres kept shooting, calm and measured. Every bullet had a purpose. Every shot bought someone else another breath. By the time the last rooftop went silent, dawn was bleeding faint light across the horizon. The fight was over. Every Marine was alive. When Torres climbed down, her rifle still warm, no one spoke. The SEALs just stared. The same men who doubted her now looked at her like she was the last sane thing left in the world. One finally whispered, "That's not rumor." And that was enough. The convoy rolled back into base under pale floodlights. Dust still clung to their uniforms, blood drying in streaks. Medics moved fast, but there were no body bags, not one. Inside the operations tent, the air was different. Steele stood at the table, arms crossed. When Torres walked in, boots heavy on plywood, no one laughed. He met her eyes. "Specter 6, he said slowly. "You kept every man alive today." He didn't salute, he didn't smile. He just nodded once. From Marcus Steele, that was worth more than any medal. The room froze in silence, not fear this time, but respect. Torres saluted, crisp, perfect. Steele returned it, short and sharp. Nothing more needed to be said. That night, word spread across every post, every chow hall, every barracks in Kabul. Recruits carved S6 into helmet and rifle stocks. Veterans whispered her name like prayer. And somewhere outside, under a sky full of cold stars, Torres sat alone, cleaning her rifle. The metal glinted faintly in her hands. She whispered to herself, "As long as they come home, the name's worth it." The wind carried the words into the dark. And for a moment, the legend didn't feel like a myth. It felt human. Quiet. True. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why couldn't she sleep that night? The base was quiet. Too quiet. Even the generators hummed softer, as if the desert itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. But Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres lay awake, eyes open to the ceiling, mind replaying the sounds that silence could not erase, the echo of shots, the breath of men she dragged from death. They were all alive, every one of them. So why did it still feel like loss? She sat up, swung her legs over the side of the cot and rubbed her hands over her face. Her palms still smelled faintly of gun oil. Her uniform hung folded on the chair, ribbons darkened by dust. Outside, through the torn flap of her tent, Kabul's lights flickered faintly against the horizon like dying stars. Torres slipped her boots back on. No armor, no weapon, just habit. Sleep could wait. The path to the perimeter was quiet. A couple of young Marines saluted her as she passed, the new ones, wide-eyed and reverent. The kind who now whispered her call sign like it meant safety. She returned the gesture briefly, then kept walking. They didn't understand. The legend didn't protect anyone. It only weighed you down. At the observation post, Sergeant Ramos sat slouched behind a pair of night vision goggles, chewing a protein bar. He straightened fast when he saw her. "Ma'am, Sergeant, thought you'd be racking out." "Can't sleep," she said simply. You. He shrugged. Too quiet feels wrong. Torres nodded. He wasn't wrong. Kabul's outskirts never slept, not really. But tonight it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. They stood there in silence for a moment, two silhouettes framed by red light, watching the desert blur into darkness. Ramos hesitated, then said, "Heard the general called you Specter 6. She didn't answer. He tried again awkwardly. "I mean, I'd heard stories, but seeing it I dunno. Kinda makes a man think legends might be real after all." Torres looked at him then, eyes steady. "Don't believe in legends, Ramos. Believe in people." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Still, ma'am, hell of a thing." When she turned back to the horizon, she caught something. Movement, faint and low, beyond the ridgeline. A trick of the wind, maybe, or something else. She reached for the binoculars, scanning the dark. Nothing. Just the desert breathing. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching back. By morning, that feeling hadn't left her. The base came alive with the usual chaos. Radios buzzing, trucks growling, coffee steaming in tin mugs that smelled like diesel. But beneath the routine, there was tension, the kind that travels faster than orders. General Steele was already at the briefing table when Torres entered the ops tent. His face looked like it had been carved out of old stone, tired, immovable. "Sit," he said. Around the table sat 6 others, officers, intel analysts, a medic still wearing gloves stained from the night before. Steele didn't waste time. "Recon Bravo's ambush wasn't random," he began. "We recovered intel from one of the dead insurgents, satellite phones, calls routed through the same coordinates outside Jalrez Valley." He slid a photo across the table. A compound, low walls, satellite dish. Nothing unusual until you looked closer. Antennas, cables, power generators. "That," Steele said, "is a command hub. We believe it's coordinating every ambush across the sector." The officers murmured. One of them leaned forward. "You're saying there's an organized network behind these strikes?" "I'm saying," Steele replied, "someone's pulling the strings, and we're going to cut them." His eyes flicked to Torres. "You'll lead the recon element. Specter team, 6 men. Quiet entry, confirm and extract intel. No casualties, no noise, understood?" Torres nodded. "Yes, sir." He studied her face a moment longer, as if weighing not her skill, but her humanity. Then he said quietly, "You've earned a name that moves men, Sergeant. Don't let it control you." She met his eyes. "Never do, sir." That night the mission began. The team moved under moonlight, a convoy stripped down to 2 vehicles. No heavy armor, no lights, just engines whispering through the dust. Inside, the air smelled of sweat and fear, disguised as focus. Torres sat in the lead truck, scanning the map glowing faintly on her tablet. The route cut through dry riverbeds and broken terrain. Perfect country for an ambush, which meant perfect country for her. "Specter 6, the radio whispered. "We're at phase line Alpha." "Copy," she murmured. "Dismount, we walk from here." The men followed her out, 6 shadows blending into the landscape. They moved in silence, footsteps swallowed by sand. Torres' eyes never stopped moving, the way the ground curved, the smell of diesel faint on the air, the shimmer of heat that didn't belong at night. It took them 2 hours to reach the compound. She raised her hand, "Stop." Then crouched, whispering into comms. 2 guards on the north wall, another inside the courtyard, lights minimal, we go silent. Her second, Corporal Vance, gave a tight nod. "You're up, boss." Torres slipped forward, low and fluid. The desert wind tugged at her scarf. Her pulse slowed, steadying itself like a metronome. At the wall she climbed without noise, one hand, one breath, one thought. At the top she paused, listened, then dropped into shadow. 2 guards stood near the generator, smoking, weapons slung carelessly. Torres leveled her rifle, 2 muffled shots. Both bodies fell quietly. She signaled the team in. They moved fast, clean. Rooms cleared one by one, laptops, documents, maps scattered across tables. Vance crouched over a computer. "Ma'am, you'll want to see this." She knelt beside him. On the screen, photos of American patrol routes, schedules, convoy manifests. Someone had been feeding them information from inside. Her stomach tightened. How the hell did they get this? Before Vance could answer, the power flickered once, twice, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Torres froze. The hum of the generator stopped. The desert went silent. Then a single voice came through the radio. A voice that wasn't theirs. "Specter 6. Her blood went cold. The voice was calm, male, confident. "We've been waiting for you." Then the night exploded. Gunfire tore through the compound walls. Bullets chewed the sand. Men shouted, "Dove for cover." A grenade burst near the door, light shredding the dark. "Ambush," someone screamed. Torres hit the ground hard, her helmet slamming against concrete. She rolled, returned fire, short, controlled bursts. Shadows flitted across the walls, muzzle flashes like lightning. She reached the radio, shouting, "Vance, status." "Static." "Ramos." "Nothing." Smoke thickened, choking the air. Her lungs burned. She crawled low, pulled a wounded Marine into cover. Blood spread under her hands. "Stay with me," she hissed. He groaned, eyes wide with shock. "They knew we were coming." She looked toward the courtyard and saw movement. Not insurgents, not locals. American gear. Her heart stuttered. For a moment, the world tilted. The men outside, the ones firing on them, were using U.S. rifles, U.S. comms. This wasn't just an ambush. This was betrayal. She forced herself up, firing through the haze, dropping 2 shapes before ducking again. Her hands were steady, her mind was. Inside, Vance dragged the intel drives into a pack. "We have to move." "Rear exit," she shouted. They sprinted through the side corridor, bullets shredding plaster behind them. Outside, the desert stretched wide and cold. Torres hit the ground, rifle up. "Radio check, Specter team, report." 3 voices came back, only 3. Half her team was gone. She didn't have time to mourn. She led the survivors toward the ravine, low and fast, boots kicking dust. Rounds whistled overhead, tracers slicing the night. They reached the ridge, dove behind rock. Vance gasped, clutching his side. Blood leaked between his fingers. "I'm fine," he lied. She tore open his vest, pressed a field dressing against the wound. "You're not." He smiled weakly. "Still breathing. You taught me that means I'm fine." Torres didn't smile. She looked back toward the burning compound. Flames danced where silence used to be. Then the radio crackled again. That same voice, calm, too calm. "Specter 6, you should have stayed a ghost." Torres froze, listening. No trace of origin, no signal, just the voice. She stared into the dark, jaw tight. Whoever that was, they knew her name. Not just her call sign, her truth. The kind of knowledge that only comes from inside command lines. Vance whispered, "Ma'am, what was that?" She didn't answer. She just said, "We're moving." They disappeared into the desert, swallowed by the wind. Hours later, when dawn touched the sky, the survivors stumbled back through the forward base gates, dust-covered, hollow-eyed. Torres was the last to enter. Her gear shredded, her voice gone dry from smoke. Steele was waiting at the gate. He looked past her, counting heads. Then his expression hardened. "How many?" "3 KIA, 2 missing." His eyes narrowed. "Intel." She dropped the blood-stained pack at his feet. "Recovered." He stared at her for a long time. "You were ambushed." Yes, sir. By who? Torres met his gaze. I don't know, but they had our weapons. Steele's jaw tightened. You're saying friendlies. I'm saying someone fed them everything. For the first time, the general's expression cracked. What are you implying, Sergeant? She didn't flinch. Sir, there's a leak, and whoever it is, they're closer than we think. The silence that followed felt heavier than any firefight. Steele dismissed the others with a glance. When they were alone, he said, If you're right, then you're not hunting insurgents anymore. Torres' voice was low. No, sir, I'm hunting ghosts. Why did betrayal always sound like silence? 3 days had passed since Jalra's. 3 days since her team bled in the sand, while voices on the radio whispered her name like a warning. Specter 6. The ghost they couldn't kill. The compound was gone, burned to ash and classified into oblivion. The official report called it enemy infiltration, but the recovered intel told a different story. Coordinates, patrol times, encrypted logs. Someone inside the American command chain had sold them out. And Torres couldn't shake the thought, what if this wasn't the first time? She sat in the ops tent now, staring at a tablet glowing pale blue in the dark. Files scrolled past like ghosts, mission reports she'd written, redacted after submission, names blacked out, details missing. Someone had been editing her truth. The flap opened. General Marcus Steele stepped in. His voice was lower than usual, his tone stripped of authority. You haven't left this tent since the debrief. Torres didn't look up. There's something wrong with these logs. He exhaled slowly. There's always something wrong in war. Not like this, she said, tapping the screen. Someone removed entry times. They cleaned up after the ambush before we even got back. Steele crossed his arms. His eyes flicked to the data, then back to her. You're suggesting sabotage. I'm saying someone's rewriting the story, sir. Silence stretched. The hum of the generator outside filled the void. Finally, he said, You think it's internal. Torres nodded once, too clean for anything else. Steele rubbed the bridge of his nose. You're asking me to accuse my own command staff. That's not a light thing. I'm not asking, she said quietly. I'm telling you what I saw. He studied her, really studied her. The way her hands stayed still, her voice calm but edged with something heavy. You lost good men out there, he said finally. She met his eyes, and I'll lose more if we do nothing. He didn't respond. He just turned toward the exit, his words drifting back like smoke. You'd better be right, Specter 6, because once you pull at this thread, there's no stitching it back. That night the wind howled through the base. Torres walked the perimeter again, same path, same quiet, but the silence was different now. It wasn't calm, it was waiting. She reached the same lookout post where Ramos once stood. Only this time, someone else was there. A shadow she didn't recognize until he turned, cigarette glowing between his fingers. Didn't peg you for a night walker, he said. Torres squinted. Lieutenant Kellen. He nodded. That's right, Signals Division. We met at Kandahar last year. You probably don't remember. I remember everyone who runs comms, she said evenly. He chuckled softly. Guess I should take that as a compliment. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the desert stretch out under starlight. Then he said, Heard you had a rough run in Jalres, lost some good people. She didn't answer. Kellen flicked ash off the edge of the sandbag wall. Word is, you think someone on the inside sold you out. Tor's head turned sharply. That word came from you. He smiled faintly. Relax, Sergeant, nobody's listening. You'd be surprised what kind of chatter filters through the comms center. Things get intercepted. She studied his face, calm, too calm. What are you really saying, Lieutenant? He took another drag, eyes still on the horizon. I'm saying maybe you're not the only one who's noticed things that don't add up. Her pulse quickened. Go on. He lowered his voice. A few weeks before the ambush, there were encrypted transmissions piggybacking off secure satellite uplinks. U.S. bands, but the routing didn't match any authorized unit. Every time we tried to trace it, the signal disappeared. Where to? Classified subnet, he said, which means someone with high-level access, higher than mine, is laundering data. Torres felt her stomach knot. How long's this been going on? Months, maybe longer. She stared out at the horizon. You have proof? Kellen shook his head. Just fragments. Logs get scrubbed within 24 hours. But I've seen enough to know this. Whatever's feeding the enemy isn't some grunt with a grudge. It's coming from deep inside command. Tor's eyes narrowed. Why tell me? He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because you scare them, Sergeant, and scared people make mistakes. Then he dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot, and walked away, vanishing into the dark like smoke. Tor stood there long after he was gone. The stars looked cold tonight, like they knew something she didn't. By morning, she was already digging. Every break between patrols, every hour not claimed by orders, she spent combing through old logs and encrypted chatter. She traced data through time stamps, mission cross-checks, comm signatures. Patterns began to emerge, too regular to be coincidence. Every compromised mission, every unverified ambush, led back to one encryption tag. One designation buried deep inside command, Echo 47. She didn't recognize it, but it kept showing up in signals reports Kellen hadn't mentioned. Someone had hidden their identity behind the same ghost frequency. That night she went to find him again, but the lookout post was empty. By morning, word came in. Lieutenant Kellen's convoy hit an IED on a supply road. No survivors. The news hit her like a body blow. She didn't even need to hear the rest, she knew. It wasn't random. Someone had silenced him. General Steele called her into his office that afternoon. His face looked carved out of fatigue. He slid a folder across the desk. You knew this man. Torres didn't answer. Steele opened the folder. Photos, wreckage. They're calling it a mechanical failure. Her voice was cold. You know that's not true. Steele's eyes hardened. Careful. With respect, sir, you told me once that legends break men, but cover-ups destroy them. He leaned back, the chair creaking. You think I don't know that? Then help me find who did this. He stared at her, the stubborn calm in her eyes, the kind that doesn't crack under threat or grief. Finally, he said quietly, if I dig where you're pointing, I'll lose more than command. I'll lose control. Maybe control's the problem, she said. The words hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. Steele's expression flickered, something like pride hidden under anger. You're walking a fine line, Sergeant. I've walked worse. When she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Torres. She looked back. If you're right, he said softly, then you're already marked. That night Torres dreamed of fire. Of Jowra's burning, of voices calling her name through smoke. But beneath it all she heard something else, a voice she couldn't place. A whisper. Specter 6, you should have stayed a ghost. She woke drenched in sweat. The cot beneath her felt cold. Outside the base was quiet, too quiet again. She rose, strapped on her sidearm, and stepped out. The horizon was just beginning to gray with dawn. At the far end of the camp, the comms tent glowed faintly. Torres approached, boots silent on gravel. Inside, the air buzzed with low radio chatter. The duty operator nodded when he saw her. Morning, Sergeant. Pull me the last 12 hours of signal intercepts, she said. He hesitated. You'll need authorization. She fixed him with a look. Then you just got it. He didn't argue. Minutes later, she was scrolling through the logs, lines of data streaming down the monitor. Then she froze. There it was again. Echo 47. Timestamp 2:34 hours. Location, inside the base perimeter. Her pulse kicked. Someone had transmitted from within the wire. She grabbed a headset, isolated the frequency, ran a quick trace. The ping returned instantly, Tent Block C, less than 50 yards from command. She was already moving. Outside, the sun broke over the horizon as she strode through the rows of tents. Marines watched her pass, unaware of the storm under her calm. Block C, third tent from the end. She stopped outside. The flap was closed, no sound from inside. She drew her sidearm, steadied her breath, and pulled the flap open. The tent was empty. No gear, no bags, just a cot and a faint hum from a still-warm radio unit. She approached, checked the frequency. Echo 47 was gone, the line dead. But something else caught her eye, a single photo taped above the cot. Her squad, Jalriz. Someone had been watching her. She pulled the photo down, flipped it over. Scrawled on the back in black marker were 4 words that made her blood run cold. "They're inside your chain." Hours later, Torres stood outside again, wind whipping through the base, the photo clenched in her gloved hand. She stared at the command tent, where the general was meeting with senior staff. Inside that circle, someone was lying. Someone was the leak. And as the sun rose over Kabul, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. The ghost she was hunting wasn't out there anymore. It was here, among them, wearing the same flag. Why did every salute feel different now? Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres walked through the compound at dawn, and men straightened when they saw her. Not from fear, from something heavier, reverence maybe, or guilt. The legend of Specter 6 had become armor she didn't ask for. Every pair of eyes that followed her carried an unspoken question. Was she watching them too? Inside the mess tent, conversation died when she entered. Forks froze midair. A radio hummed softly from the corner, some country song about home. It felt obscene here. Torres filled a tin mug with coffee and sat alone. She didn't taste it. Across the room, Corporal Ramos hesitated, then approached. His left arm was still bandaged from Jalriz. "Ma'am, heard intel's calling it an external breach. Nothing to worry about." She looked up slowly. "You believe that?" Ramos swallowed. "Doesn't matter what I believe, does it?" "It always matters," she said quietly. He nodded unsure, then walked away. The chatter resumed, forced and hollow. Torres stared into her cup. The reflection of her own eyes rippled in the black surface, steady, unreadable. She wondered when she'd started looking like the people she used to hunt. By noon she was inside the comm center again. The hum of servers filled the narrow room, constant and nervous. The duty techs pretended not to notice her scanning the consoles. She keyed in an old diagnostic code, one the signal officers thought had been deactivated. It was. Lines of encrypted logs scrolled across the screen. She traced the Echo 47 signal back through relay towers, command routers, and into a secured node she couldn't access. A restricted terminal. Inside command itself. She stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, then keyed the command override. Access DNID. A warning flashed, unauthorized trace attempt logged. Someone would know. She looked. The door behind her opened, heavy boots. General Steele. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. His silence was command enough. "You planning to bring down my network, Sergeant?" Torres turned calm. "I'm planning to find who's killing our people." He stepped closer, eyes like flint. "You think that's how you do it, digging through classified systems without clearance?" "Clearance doesn't stop bullets, sir." "Neither does insubordination." For a moment they just stood there, soldier and commander, belief colliding with protocol. Steele exhaled sharply, the anger giving way to something else. You're crossing a line, Torres. I didn't draw it. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt the ground shifting. The general wasn't the enemy, not yet, but he was part of the wall standing between her and the truth. Steele studied her face, maybe searching for the exhaustion he refused to acknowledge. Then he said quietly, "You dig any deeper, you'll make enemies you can't see." "Then I'll stay in the dark, sir." He stared another moment, then left without another word. That night a storm rolled in from the north. Rain in Kabul was rare, but when it came like confession, sudden, relentless, cleansing nothing. Torres sat under the canopy outside her tent, watching lightning flicker across the mountains. She hadn't slept in 2 days. The flap rustled. "Permission to sit?" a voice asked. It was Lieutenant Myra Alvarez, one of the intelligence officers from Steele's staff, sharp, quiet, known for reading people better than files. Torres nodded. "You're up late." "So are you." They sat in silence for a while, rain drumming on canvas. Finally Alvarez said, "You're looking for ghosts again, aren't you?" Torres didn't answer. "I saw the trace log," Alvarez continued softly. "Echo 47, you shouldn't have gone near it." Torres' eyes narrowed. "You know what it is?" Alvarez hesitated. The lightning flashed, painting her face in brief honesty. "It's a black channel, internal courier for off-record intel transfers. Only 3 people have the encryption keys: General Steele, Colonel Brandt from logistics, and—" She trailed off. "And who?" Alvarez looked at her. "Myself." Torres' breath caught. "You're saying you run the channel?" "I monitor it, I don't control it." Alvarez's voice trembled slightly. "But something changed last month. There were transmissions I didn't authorize, high-priority packets rerouted through my terminal while I was off shift. When I tried to flag them, the system locked me out." Torres leaned forward. "Where did the data go?" Alvarez's eyes met hers. "Same coordinates you found at Jalrez." For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to stop. "Why come to me now?" Torres asked. "Because if I report it officially, it disappears. And if I say nothing, more men die." Torres studied her, the flicker of fear behind the steadiness. Truth often looked like that. "Then we trace it together," she said. Alvarez shook her head. "We can't. The next transmission could be any time, and whoever's behind it, they're watching." Torres' voice lowered. "Then we make them think we're not." Over the next 48 hours, they built their trap. Alvarez rerouted the monitor feed through an auxiliary line under maintenance cover. Torres stationed herself in the comm center after hours, disguised as routine security oversight. They waited. Hours passed. Then at 200, the signal flared to life. "Echo 47, transmission active." Torres' pulse quickened. She keyed in the trace command Alvarez had modified. The path unfolded from internal node to satellite uplink to external relay. "Location, within base perimeter." Torres leaned closer. "We've got it." But the trace froze halfway through. The screen flickered. Then a new message appeared in red. "Access TRMNATD." And below it, 3 words that weren't part of any system code. "Stay dead, Specter." The power cut instantly. The monitors went black. Alvarez swore under her breath. "They're in the system." A single gunshot cracked outside. Torres reacted first, drawing her pistol, flipping the emergency lights. The hallway glowed red. "Stay here," she ordered. She moved low through the corridor, sweeping corners. The rain had turned to mud outside, boots slapping against it. She reached the exit just as another shot rang out. Down the alley between comms and storage, a figure ran hooded fast. Torres chased, firing once. The round sparked off metal. The figure ducked into the supply yard. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for half a second. "Colonel Brandt." Torres' breath caught. She fired again, hitting a crate as he dove behind it. "Colonel, drop it." Silence. Then the crack of another pistol, wood splintered inches from her head. She flanked left, circling. The rain was deafening now. When she rounded the corner, the spot was empty. Only the back gate swung open, wind slamming it against the fence. He was gone. By the time reinforcements arrived, the yard was empty except for footprints and shell casings. Steele stood in the rain, face unreadable, listening as Torres reported. "You're accusing a senior officer of espionage," he said finally. "I'm stating what I saw, sir." He stared at her through the downpour. "Do you have proof?" She handed him the shattered flash drive she'd recovered near the crates. This was his. Serial matches, logistics command inventory. He took it, turned it over in his palm. "You realize what this means?" "Yes, sir. Someone been bleeding our missions dry from inside. And if Brandt's involved, he's not alone." Steele's expression hardened. "This doesn't leave this yard, understood?" Torres hesitated. "Sir." "That's in order." She bit back the response burning on her tongue. "Understood." He dismissed her with a curt nod. As she walked away, she looked back once. Steele was still standing there, rain soaking through his uniform, staring at the flash drive like it was a curse. At dawn, Brandt's body was found 2 miles outside the wire, single gunshot to the head. Official report, suicide. Unofficially, nobody believed it. Torres watched the medics load the stretcher into a Humvee. Alvarez stood beside her, pale. "They're tying off loose ends," she whispered. Torres said nothing. She just kept watching until the vehicle disappeared into the dust. Then she turned and walked toward command. Steele was waiting. The flash drive sat on his desk, sealed in evidence plastic. "You were right," he said quietly. "Data confirms multiple transmissions routed through Brandt's account. He was feeding our patrol schedules, drone frequencies, supply manifests." Torres' jaw tightened. Who was he working for? Steele hesitated. "That's classified now." Her eyes flashed. "With respect, sir, I earned the right to know." His voice hardened. "And I just saved your career by keeping your name out of this investigation. Don't push it." She stepped forward. "So we bury it." He met her glare. "We contain it." Torres stared at him for a long, quiet moment. "Containment doesn't stop rot, sir. It hides it." Steele looked away, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. "You think the public needs to know there's treason inside their heroes? You think the Marines need that kind of poison?" Torres' voice dropped to a whisper. "Truth isn't poison, it's disinfectant." He didn't answer. She saluted, turned to leave. As she reached the door, he said softly, "Specter 6, you keep digging, you'll end up like Brandt." She paused, not looking back. "Maybe, but at least someone will know why." Then she walked out. That night she sat alone again on the sandbag wall. The rain had passed. The sky was clear now, stars sharp as glass. Alvarez joined her silently, handing over a folded note. "What's this?" Torres asked. "From Brandt's locker. They cleared it too fast. I grabbed it before intel came." Torres unfolded it. Inside was a small memory card and a single sentence written in rushed handwriting. "They were never ours to begin with." She looked up at Alvarez, confusion flickering to dread. "What does that mean?" Alvarez's voice was barely a whisper. "It means Brandt wasn't the leak, he was the courier." Torres turned her gaze toward the command tent, where the lights still burned long after midnight. Something inside her shifted. The ghosts she hunted weren't hiding anymore. They were sitting at the table. Why did truth always arrive too late? The sun rose over the Kabul horizon like a slow accusation, a dull orange light crawling across a base that no longer felt safe. Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres stood outside the command tent, fingers tight around the small memory card Alvarez had stolen from Brandt's locker. It felt heavier than metal. One sentence echoed in her mind. They were never ours to begin with. She'd read those words 100 times and still, they made no sense. Inside, the air was dry and cold, humming with generators. The smell of burnt coffee and tension. Torres slipped the memory card into a secure terminal. The screen blinked alive. Encrypted files, classified headers, then video logs. She hesitated only a second before pressing play. The first feed showed a drone strike briefing. Not unusual until she saw the faces in the frame. Colonel Brandt, 2 intelligence officers, and one more. General Marcus Steele. Torres leaned closer, her heart tightening. Steele's voice filled the tent, calm, precise, confident. Authorization confirmed. Transfer the data uplink to our liaison in Sector 9. Keep the channel dark. No command signatures. Brandt's voice followed. Sir, what about Specter 6's patrol routes? They'll overlap. Steele cut him off. Then reroute them. I don't want her anywhere near this. The footage ended. Torres sat frozen. The hum of the equipment felt distant now, like she was underwater. Steele, the man who'd warned her not to dig, the man who told her legends break men. He wasn't covering for a traitor. He was leading the operation. She opened another file. Mission manifests, drone coordinates, encrypted communications labeled Echo 47 confidential, private channel authorized. Every single one carried his approval code. Her breath came slow, deliberate. She wanted to feel anger, betrayal, something sharp enough to cut through the shock. But all she felt was quiet. That kind of quiet that lives right before an explosion. She pulled the drive, slipped it into her pocket, and left without a sound. Outside, the afternoon heat hit like a wall. The base buzzed around her, engines, boots, laughter that sounded too loud, too normal. The world was still turning. Nobody else knew it was already burning. Torres found Alvarez near the motor pool, running diagnostics on a comms truck. "We need to talk," she said. Alvarez caught her tone instantly. "You found something." Torres nodded. "Everything." They ducked inside the maintenance bay, the smell of oil and dust thick in the air. Torres plugged the drive into a handheld reader. The footage played again, flickering across the screen. Alvarez's face went pale. "My God." He's been feeding operations data directly into the Black Channel, not to insurgents, to someone else. Who? That's the part I don't know. Torres scrolled to the metadata at the end of the recording. The destination address wasn't local. It wasn't even military. It was a contractor domain. Alvarez frowned. "You're saying this is corporate?" Torres' jaw clenched. "Private defense network, stateside." It hit them both at once. The realization that the betrayal wasn't treason. It was business. Somewhere far from the desert, someone was selling wars like stock options. And Marcus Steele was cashing in. Alvarez exhaled shakily. "We can't take this to command. He'll bury it before it hits the system." Torres nodded slowly. "Then we go around him." "To who?" "The only people who outrank him." "The Pentagon," Alvarez whispered, horrified. Torres looked up, eyes steady. "If it has to burn that high, then yes." That night the storm returned. Wind howled through the base, tearing dust into the air. Torres moved quietly through the shadows, the small encrypted drive sealed inside her vest. Every camera she passed felt like an eye. Every Marine on guard felt like a question. At the comms hub, Alvarez waited with 2 portable transmitters. "Satellite windows 5 minutes. After that they'll know." Torres nodded. 5 minutes is enough." She knelt beside the uplink panel, hands steady as she connected the drive. The screen glowed faintly. Alvarez watched the timer. "Signals clean, go." Torres hit upload. The progress bar crawled upward, 12%, 37%, 64%. Then the alarm blared. The screen flashed red. Security breach DATSCTD. Alvarez cursed, they're in the system. Keep it running, Torres ordered. Almost there. Torres, they'll trace it. I don't care. Boots thundered outside, shouts, orders. Torres watched the percentage climb, 87%, 92%, then freeze. The door burst open. Armed MPs flooded in. At their head stood General Marcus Steele. Step away from that console, he barked. Torres didn't move. He strode forward, voice like thunder. That's an order, Sergeant. Her finger hovered over the final command. This isn't an ambush anymore, sir. This is exposure. Steele's jaw flexed. You don't understand what you're doing. Enlighten me. He took a step closer. You think you're saving lives. You're not. You're dismantling stability. Everything you fought for will collapse. This isn't betrayal, it's preservation. Torres stared at him. Preservation for who? Steele's voice softened, almost pitying. You think Washington funds endless wars for honor. They pay for results, and results require control. Someone had to keep the chaos profitable. The words hit harder than any bullet. Behind him, the MPs hesitated, confused, waiting for clarity that never came. Torres whispered, You sold your own men. I protected them from the illusion that this war could ever end cleanly. Something inside her snapped, quiet, cold, irreversible. Then you've forgotten what uniform you wear. Steele's expression hardened. Stand down. Torres turned back to the console. 99%. Steele raised his sidearm. Don't make me. The upload hit 100%. She pressed send. The lights flickered once, then died. The room plunged into darkness as the uplink powered down. When the emergency lights came on, Torres was on her knees, hands behind her head. Alvarez stood beside her, frozen. Steele's voice was steady again, calm, deadly. Arrest them both. Hours later, the base slept under heavy rain. Torres sat in a dim holding room, wrists cuffed, dirt streaking her face. The hum of the overhead light filled the silence. Outside the door, voices murmured, Steele, among them. Containment protocol, charges pending, unauthorized transmission. Then the voices faded. Alvarez sat across from her, head lowered. They'll make it disappear, she whispered. Torres' tone was calm. The upload went through. You don't know that. I know enough. She leaned back, closing her eyes. For the first time in days, she felt something like peace. Minutes passed, the door opened. Steele stepped in alone. His uniform was immaculate again, his tone surgical. You've made a mistake, Sergeant. Torres didn't answer. He set a file down on the table. Inside were still frames from the video logs. His face, her face, Alvarez, redacted stamps across every page. This won't leave this base, he said quietly. By morning, Command will have a new version of events. You went rogue. You compromised an op. You'll be court-martialed and forgotten. Torres looked up at him, eyes calm. And if I'm already a ghost? Steele's jaw tightened. You don't get to romanticize treason. Neither do you. He leaned closer. You really think anyone will believe you over me? Torres tilted her head slightly. Doesn't matter what they believe. Truth doesn't need believers. It just waits. Steele's hand slammed the table. The sound echoed like gunfire. You think you understand what this world takes, Sergeant? I built peace out of blood. You think that makes me a monster? Fine. But without monsters, the system falls apart. Torres met his stare. Then maybe it should. For the first time, something cracked in his expression. Not guilt, not fear, but fatigue. He whispered, almost to himself, You sound just like I did 30 years ago. Then he turned and left. At dawn, the holding cell door opened again. A young MP stood there, nervous. Sergeant Torres, you're being transferred. To where? He hesitated. HQ command stateside. Alvarez met Torres' eyes. They're burying us. Torres stood, then let them dig deep. As she stepped outside, she noticed something, a small piece of paper folded into her pocket. She didn't remember it being there. She unfolded it slowly. Inside was a single printed line. Upload received, standby. Her chest tightened. The message was unsigned. She looked up. The sky was pale with morning. Somewhere beyond the static of this war, someone had heard her. She exhaled once steady. You hear that? She whispered. Alvarez frowned. Hear what? Torres looked toward the horizon. The sound of cracks. Cracks in the armor. The convoy engine started. Dust rose behind them. The base faded into the distance, a world built on silence and shadows. Torres didn't look back. Far away, in a building that smelled of marble and money, a notification blinked on a secured terminal. Classified transmission received. Origin, forward OPERATING base Kabul. The analyst who opened it frowned at the contents, video logs, encrypted files, mission manifest signed by General Marcus Steele. Her hand trembled as she picked up the phone. Sir, you're going to want to see this. Back in Kabul, Steele stood at his desk, unaware of what was already unraveling beyond his reach. He stared at the rain beating against the window, jaw set, eyes tired. Behind him, a photo hung crooked on the wall, his old unit decades ago. Young faces, too young. He whispered to the empty room, You were right, Torres. Legends break men. Why did the air back home feel heavier than any battlefield? The plane touched down just after midnight, its engines whining into silence on the tarmac of Andrews Air Force Base. Rain streaked across the windows. Beyond the glass, Washington glowed faintly, sterile and distant. Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres sat shackled in the rear row, wrists bruised from hours of restraint. Across from her, 2 MPs watched in silence. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. When the hatch opened, a gust of cold air swept through the cabin. Specter 6, one of the MPs said, reading the tag on his clipboard like a sentence. You're up. She stood, chains clinking, and stepped into the rain. No crowds, no reporters, no ceremony. Just a dark convoy waiting on the edge of the runway. A black SUV door opened. A man in a suit stepped out, gray hair, perfect posture, voice like a file scraping steel. Gunnery Sergeant Torres, he said. I'm Director Havorson, Office of Internal Security. You'll ride with me. No salute, no acknowledgement of her rank. Just control. Torres climbed in. The car pulled away, headlights cutting through the wet night. The city passed by in flashes, monuments half hidden by fog, streets slick with rain, the Potomac glinting like cold glass. Havorson spoke first. You've created quite a situation. Torres stared out the window. Is that what we're calling it now? You transmitted classified data without authorization. You compromised an ongoing containment operation. Containment, she repeated softly. That's one word for it. Havorson's tone stayed even. General Steele's actions, however questionable, kept several theaters stable. Your interference jeopardized that stability. By stability, you mean profit. He glanced at her. You don't understand the full picture. Then paint it for me. Silence. Only the rhythm of tires on wet asphalt. Finally, he said, the world runs on equilibrium, Sergeant. Every conflict generates contracts. Every contract sustains economies. It isn't morality, it's maintenance. Torres' jaw tightened. Maintenance of what? Order. She turned her head then, eyes cold. Order built on betrayal isn't order. It's rot with metals. Havorson didn't answer. They arrived at a government complex before dawn, faceless concrete. No flags, no signs. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over white walls. Torres was processed like cargo. Fingerprints, photograph, confiscation of every scrap of metal she carried, dog tags included. When they led her into the interrogation room, she almost laughed. It looked exactly like the rooms she'd interrogated people in overseas. Same table, same one-way mirror, same smell of recycled air. Halvorsen entered last, a folder in hand. He set it down between them. "Your file," he said. "Quite a career. Reconnaissance, sharpshooter, 2 tour in Mosul, 3 in Kabul, commendations for valor, discipline, precision." He paused. "And yet, you've managed to turn all that into a liability." Torres didn't flinch. "Truth's always a liability, sir. Depends on who owns it." He opened the folder. Inside were printouts of the files she'd uploaded, Steele's voice, the Black Channel transmissions, Brandt's signature logs. Red stamps covered each page, restricted review. Halvorsen tapped them lightly. "These don't prove treason. They prove coordination, temporary cooperation with external entities for intelligence sharing." "External entities," Torres said quietly. "You mean contractors who buy body counts?" "Watch your tone." "Or what? You'll court-martial me for telling the truth you already buried." His eyes narrowed. "You think the public needs another scandal? You think soldiers, families need to hear that their children died for numbers on a balance sheet? You'd break the nation to cleanse your conscience." Torres leaned forward, voice low and steady. "Maybe it needs breaking." For the first time, his composure cracked. "You're not a martyr, Sergeant. You're a soldier. You follow orders." "I did, right up until they stopped serving what I swore to protect." The room went quiet again. A drop of water fell from her hair onto the steel table. It echoed louder than any gunshot. Halvorsen closed the file. "You'll be remanded to secure custody pending review. The rest will be handled internally." "Meaning?" "Meaning this conversation never happened." He rose, adjusting his cuffs. "I'll give you some advice, Sergeant. Ghosts don't win wars, they just haunt them." Torres watched him leave. The door locked behind him with a sound she'd heard too many times before. Hours passed. No clock on the wall, no sense of time. Just her reflection in the one-way glass, pale, unshaken, waiting. When the door opened again, it was Halvorsen. It was Myra Alvarez. Torres blinked. "You how?" Alvarez smiled faintly. "Officially, I'm under review for data tampering. Unofficially, someone high enough wants this story to live." She sat down across from her, slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Torres unfolded it, coordinates, a code, a phrase scribbled beneath. Echo 47 confirmed, stateside link compromised. Alvarez whispered, "They traced the contractor network. It doesn't stop at steel. There's a chain of private defense investors, senators, board members, policy directors. The same people who fund the wars also decide where to send us next." Torres stared at the code. "How did you get this in here?" "I didn't," Alvarez smiled thinly. "Someone wanted you to have it." "Who?" Alvarez hesitated. "A name came through the back channel this morning, a clearance tag, Specter Actual." Torres frowned. "That's not mine." "No," Alvarez said, "it's higher." A strange chill crept up Torres' spine. For years, Specter 6 had been her identity, the ghost who survived what others couldn't. But Specter Actual, that meant there was another. Someone above her, using her legend as cover. She whispered, "They built the myth to hide a command chain." Alvarez nodded, "And you were the proof of concept." The realization hit hard. Every mission she'd survived, every impossible extraction, every classified rumor, all of it narrative management. They hadn't just used her skill, they'd used her existence. Torres' voice was quiet. "Then I was never a soldier." Alvarez's eyes softened. "You were the only one who didn't forget what that meant." That night Torres was moved again, a transfer they called it. 2 guards, 1 vehicle. The road wound through DC's industrial outskirts. Streetlights flashed rhythmically through the window bars. She sat silent, processing everything, until one of the guards' radios crackled with static. Then a voice, faint but deliberate. Convoy 2, reroute east. Priority extraction protocol. Specter clearance. The driver frowned. That's not our channel. The other guard checked his handset. Reroute where? Static again. Then Echo 47 secure. Follow the light. Before they could respond, the vehicle jerked, tires squealing. A black van had cut across the road, headlights off. The driver slammed the brakes. The back door flew open. Hands grabbed Torres, pulling her into the dark. By the time the guards regained their bearings, the van was gone. Torres came to with the smell of diesel and metal. They were still moving fast. Across from her sat a woman she didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, headset, calm as gravity. "Who are you?" Torres asked. The woman smiled faintly. "You can call me Handler. Specter Actual sends his regards." Torres' pulse quickened. "He's real." "Very, and impressed. You did what none of us could, force the cracks open." "Why?" The handler's tone softened. "Because wars don't end anymore, Sergeant. They recycle. We needed proof from the inside. You gave it to us." Torres frowned. "You're telling me I've been working for a ghost I didn't know existed?" "Not for, with. He built the system that let you survive it long enough to see the truth." Torres leaned back, trying to steady her breath. "And what happens now?" The handler looked out the window. "Now you decide what kind of ghost you want to be, the kind that haunts or the kind that warns." Torres stared at the rain streaking the glass, her reflection fractured by light. By morning, they reached an airfield somewhere in Virginia, unmarked hangars, quiet runways, mist clinging to the trees. A plane waited, engines idling. Torres stepped out, wind cutting cold through her uniform. The handler handed her a small case. Inside, her dog tags, a new ID badge, and a single sealed envelope. "No one here will acknowledge you existed, but you'll have freedom and a choice. The envelope contains the coordinates of the network's heart. You can walk away, disappear, or you can finish it." Torres stared at the envelope. "And if I go back?" The handler's eyes held hers. "Then you stop being their weapon and start being their reckoning." Torres looked out at the fog-shrouded horizon. She thought of Steele, of Brandt, of Kellen, of the Marines who'd followed her into fire believing the world was still worth something. She took the envelope. "Tell Specter Actual," she said quietly, "the ghost's still moving." The handler smiled. "He'll know." As Torres boarded the plane, dawn broke again, soft, uncertain, bleeding light over the clouds. Somewhere below, the world kept spinning, unbothered by the cost of its order. Torres closed her eyes, the hum of the engines settling into a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. She whispered, "If ghosts can't rest, then maybe they're not supposed to." And as the aircraft lifted into the gray morning, one thought stayed with her, steady, resolute, unshakable. Sometimes you have to burn what's broken, just to see who runs toward the fire. Why did freedom feel like exile? The plane had landed hours ago on a private strip carved into mist-covered forest. No flags, no insignia, just a metal hangar humming with quiet purpose. Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres, no uniform, no rank, stepped onto wet tarmac and breathed air that didn't smell of cordite. For the first time in years, she wasn't anyone's soldier. That should have felt like peace. It didn't. A man met her halfway down the runway. Civilian clothes, calm eyes, posture of someone who'd carried command and buried it. "Specter 6, he said, "welcome home." Torres studied him. Home. He smiled faintly, "for what's left of it." She followed him through the hangar, down a stairwell that smelled of oil and rain. At the bottom, a small operations room lit by map screens and low chatter. Men and women moved with military precision, but no insignia. A ghost network. Her guide gestured to a table where a single envelope waited, the same one the handler had given her. Torres opened it. Inside were coordinates, bank transfers, and a list of names, corporate board members, shell companies, politicians. At the top of the list, Marcus Steele. She felt her pulse steady. I thought he was being investigated. He is, the man said. By his friends, they'll clear him in a week. Torres looked up. Then we don't have a week. He nodded once. Specter Actual wants him contained before the hearings. Quietly, you'll lead the field team. Field team. The door opened behind her. Two figures stepped in, Alvarez and Ramos. Torres blinked. You. Alvarez grinned faintly. Guess ghosts travel in packs. Ramos shrugged. You didn't think they'd let you have all the fun. Torres felt something she hadn't felt in months, something dangerously close to warmth. She pushed it down. Brief me. That night they studied the data. Steele had been relocated to a secure compound outside Quantico, officially for questioning, unofficially for protection. He wasn't under arrest, he was being cleaned. Torres traced the network on the wall map, red lines, names, offshore accounts. Every trail ended in the same place. Aegis Strategic Solutions, a defense contractor with ties to congressional funding boards. Steele wasn't working for them. He was them. Alvarez pointed to the top corner. They're shifting assets overseas, erasing everything before the hearings. If we don't intercept that data, the truth dies with it. Ramos cracked his knuckles. So we take the compound. Torres shook her head. Too loud, we go in clean. No casualties, no noise. We get Steele alive. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. Alive. Torres' voice dropped. He answers for it, all of it. 2 nights later they moved. A single SUV on a service road, headlights off, forest pressing close on both sides. Wind carried the smell of rain and pine. Torres sat in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the dark. The silence between them was thick, anticipation, fear, ghosts. When they reached the ridge overlooking the compound, she raised the binoculars. Floodlights swept the perimeter, 2 guard towers, motion sensors, cameras tied into a private network. Ramos whistled softly. That's not security, that's paranoia. Torres smiled faintly. Same thing if you're guilty enough. They moved on foot from there, 3 shadows cutting through the trees. The air buzzed with insects and electricity. At the fence line, Alvarez patched into the control box, fingers moving fast. Give me 30 seconds. The floodlights flickered once, then died. Torres slipped through first, landing soft in the grass. Ramos followed, rifle low, scanning. They crossed the yard like ghosts. At the back entrance, Torres used Brandt's old access code, unchanged. Steele had never expected anyone to come back. Inside, the corridors smelled of bleach and paper. Monitors glowed faintly with surveillance feeds, hallways, offices, storage. All empty. Alvarez frowned, too quiet. Torres nodded, he knows. They moved deeper. The building's heart was a large briefing room, polished table, digital map wall, a single lamp casting long shadows. Steele sat at the far end, waiting. No guards, no surprise in his eyes. Just resignation. Specter 6, he said softly. I wondered how long it would take. Torres kept her weapon low. You always did like staging your last acts. He smiled without warmth. I assume you've come for answers. Ramos muttered, or closure. Steele's gaze flicked to him. Closure's a myth like heroes. Torres stepped forward. You used me. You used yourself, he replied. You needed purpose, I gave you one. You turned soldiers into commodities. I kept them funded. By selling the wars. By keeping them alive long enough to matter. Tor's jaw tightened. Tell that to the men we buried. Steele leaned back. You think exposing me changes anything? Someone else takes my seat. The contracts keep moving. The wars adapt. Maybe, Torres said, but at least you won't be the one cashing the checks. He studied her, really looked at her, as if seeing the mirror he'd avoided for years. You sound like I used to. She nodded once. And you sound like what I swore I'd never become. He sighed. You can't kill a system, Sergeant. Then I'll starve it. A soft chime interrupted them. Alvarez looked down at her tablet. Someone's accessing the uplink. He triggered a failsafe. Steele smiled. You didn't think I'd sit here undefended. Torres turned to him. What did you do? Release the ledger, he said calmly. Every name, every account. If I fall, they all burn, including the ones funding your friends in that little basement you came from. The room fell silent. Alvarez whispered, he's not bluffing. Steele stood slowly. You think you're clean, Sergeant. Every bullet you fired, every mission you survived, funded by the same blood money. You're the product of the disease you're trying to cure. Tor's grip tightened on her weapon. He spread his hands. So go ahead, pull the trigger, but understand you're only killing the symptom. For a moment, the only sound was rain against the roof. Then Torres lowered her rifle. No, she said quietly, you don't get to die clean. She stepped forward, grabbed the tablet from Alvarez and keyed in a command. Steele frowned. What are you doing? Finishing the upload, she said. Those files will destroy everything. She met his eyes. Exactly. Steele lunged forward, but Ramos pinned him against the table. The screen flashed. Data transfer complete. Torres exhaled slowly. It's over. Steele laughed, dry, hollow. You really think the world cares who profits from its wars? Maybe not, she said, but they'll know your name when they bury you under them. He smiled faintly. Then we're both ghosts. Before she could answer, a shot rang out. Steele jerked once, then fell. Ramos stood behind him, pistol smoking, face unreadable. Torres spun. What the hell did you do? He was reaching, Ramos said. You saw it. He was finished. Ramos holstered the weapon. No, he was. Men like that never are. She stared at him, fury and grief twisting together. But there was no time for judgment. Sirens began wailing outside. Alvarez grabbed the drive from the console. We need to move, now. They sprinted through the hallways, lights flashing red. Outside, vehicles converged. Private security, maybe government, maybe both. They dove into the forest, rain turning soil to mud. Behind them, the compound burned. By dawn, they'd reached the extraction ridge. A single helicopter waited unmarked, engines low. Torres climbed aboard last, drenched, silent. As the chopper lifted, the compound shrank to a flicker below, smoke curling like confession into the morning sky. Alvarez leaned close, shouting over the rotors. The upload's live. Multiple outlets mirrored the data before they could block it. Steele's entire network's public. Torres didn't react. She just stared out the open door at the horizon. Ramos sat opposite her, hands still steady. You think it'll change anything? Torres' eyes stayed on the distance. Change starts somewhere, even if it's small. He nodded slowly, and after this. She didn't answer. Because she didn't know. Hours later, the helicopter touched down at the forest base again. Inside, the command screens flickered with chaos. News feeds, headlines, emergency statements. The system was cracking. Alvarez set the recovered drive on the table. You did it, Torres. You actually did it. Torres looked at the scrolling footage. Steele's recordings, bank transactions, everything. Crowds outside the Capitol. Investigations announced. Names falling like dominoes. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt empty. Ramos clapped her shoulder. You okay? She managed a thin smile. I'm breathing. He nodded. Sometimes that's the only victory left. Across the room, a new message appeared on the main monitor. Incoming transmission, Specter actual. The handler's voice came through, calm, distorted. Specter 6, the system's reacting. You lit the match. Now step back before it burns you too. Torres stared at the screen. And if I do? Then you become what they feared most, a soldier who doesn't belong to anyone. The line went dead. She looked around the room, the ghosts who'd followed her into this fight, the screens filled with names falling like rain, and realized something. Truth had no flag. It only had witnesses. She turned toward the door. Alvarez called after her, "Where are you going?" Torres stopped, looked back once. To find the ones who still think silence keeps them safe. Outside, the forest was quiet again. Mist rising from the ground, birds breaking dawn. Torres walked until the noise of the base faded behind her. The world ahead was wide and uncertain. For the first time, she smiled. Because ghosts, she thought, don't fade. They echo. Why was it always quiet after the storm? Days turned into weeks. Then months. And somewhere between the noise of the world unraveling and the silence that followed, Gunnery Sergeant Elena Torres disappeared. No one officially knew where she went. But stories began to surface, soldiers who swore they'd seen her on mountain trails, border towns, refugee corridors, always alone, always moving, never staying long enough to leave a shadow. The headlines back home burned bright for a while. Defense Network scandal exposed. General Marcus Steele under investigation. Contractors linked to Senate funding. For a brief moment, the truth had a pulse. But like all things inconvenient, it faded. The world found new distractions. The noise returned. And the ghosts went back to whispering. Torres stood one evening on the edge of a coastal village, somewhere unnamed, somewhere far. Children played in the dirt, chasing kites made of plastic. A woman hung laundry under a pale sky. It was peace, fragile, temporary, but real. She traded her uniform for plain clothes, her rifle for silence. But the weight in her chest hadn't lifted. When she looked toward the horizon, she saw it the way soldiers always did, as both escape and warning. A radio crackled on the table beside her. Alvarez's voice came through, distorted by static. "You still there?" Torres picked it up, barely. "You see the news?" "I stopped watching." "Well, you should. Steele's dead." Torres closed her eyes. "How?" "Heart failure, they said, but you and I both know better. Someone tied up the last thread." She didn't respond. The waves filled the silence instead. Alvarez's tone softened. "You did what none of us could. You tore the mask off." "Did I?" Torres whispered. "Because the face underneath looks the same." "Maybe, but at least they can't pretend they didn't see it." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Alvarez said, "You could come back, you know. There's talk about rebuilding oversight, new command structures." Torres smiled faintly. "Oversight built by the same hands that hid the bodies. No, Myra, that's just another name for a cage." "Then what will you do?" Torres looked at the horizon. The light was turning gold. "What ghosts do, keep walking." The radio clicked off. She traveled through small towns and borders that didn't exist on maps, places where war had left its fingerprints, but not its name. She helped rebuild wells, patched roofs, fixed radios. Sometimes the locals asked her name. She'd smile and say, "Elena." Never Specter 6. Because that name wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to something larger. Something broken that still refused to die. At night, she'd sit by small fires and write letters she'd never send. To Kellen, who died under a sky that never forgave. To Alvarez, who kept faith when everyone else lost it. To herself, the version that believed duty was the same as truth. She wrote because it made the silence less heavy, and because words were the only weapon that didn't kill. One morning, she woke to the sound of a vehicle approaching, black tires on dirt, slow, deliberate. A figure stepped out, a woman in plain clothes, the same calm posture she remembered. The handler. Torres stood. "You found me." The woman smiled. "You didn't hide very well." "I wasn't trying to." They sat across from each other at the table. The ocean wind carried sand between them. The handler placed a folder down. "Specter Actual wanted you to have this." Torres didn't reach for it. "He's still alive." The handler nodded. "Alive, yes. Free, not exactly. The network you exposed broke too fast. Too many people wanted a piece of what was left. He's cleaning up." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Cleaning up or covering up?" The handler met her gaze. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Torres studied her face. "So why bring this here?" The handler leaned back. "Because you started something we can't finish without you. There's a new thread: Europe, Africa, Asia, contractors using new names, same methods. They adapted. You can help stop them." Torres stared at the folder for a long time. Then she said softly, "You want me to go back into the fire?" "I want you to decide what to do with it," the handler said. "Specter 6 is still a name that carries weight." Tor's eyes drifted toward the children playing near the shore. "That name cost too many lives already." The handler followed her gaze. "You can't save everyone, Sergeant." "I'm not trying to." "Then what are you trying to do?" Torres looked down at her hands, scarred, steady. "Remember who we were before the orders." The handler didn't argue. She just left the folder there and stood. "When you're ready," she said, "we'll find you." Torres didn't say goodbye. Because ghosts never do. That night she sat alone by the ocean. Wind pulled her hair across her face. Waves whispered like voices she'd lost. She opened the folder. Inside were photos, coordinates, names, encrypted messages, corporate seals. Evidence, the kind that could light another match. She stared at them until the lines blurred. Then she tore the pages out, one by one, and fed them to the fire. The flames caught slowly, curling the paper into black petals. Her face reflected in the orange light, half shadow, half clarity. She whispered to the burning pages, "Enough ghosts." When the last ember died, she took her old dog tags from her pocket, the same ones she'd carried since Kabul, and threw them into the waves. They disappeared without a sound. At dawn, the first light crawled across the water. Torres stood barefoot in the sand, watching it rise. The sky turned gold, then silver, then white. For the first time, she didn't think about orders or ranks or missions. She thought about the people who'd walked beside her, the ones who'd stayed human in a world that rewarded silence. She thought about steel, and how even monsters believed they were protecting something. She thought about the general who demanded her call sign, and how silence filled the room when she answered. Because deep down, they all knew what Specter 6 meant. Not a name. A reminder that no matter how deep the lie goes, someone always comes back for the truth. She turned away from the water and started walking inland. The village was waking, engines sputtering, doors opening, children laughing. Ordinary life, the kind she'd almost forgotten how to recognize. A boy waved at her from the fence line. She waved back. He called out something in a language she didn't know. But the tone was unmistakable. "Hoping." Torres smiled. And for the first time, it didn't feel like pretending. By mid-morning, she reached the crossroads where the road split, one path leading back toward the coast, the other winding into the hills. A faded sign stood there, its letters worn away by rain and time. Torres stopped, looked at both directions, then up at the sky. She could almost hear Alvarez's voice, half mocking, half proud. "So what now, ghost?" Torres whispered back. Now we live. She adjusted the strap of her bag and chose the harder road, the one that climbed, not curved. As she walked, the horizon swallowed her slowly, until she was just a figure moving through light and dust. No rank, no orders, no legend. Just a woman who'd seen too much to stay quiet and too much to stop caring. Somewhere in a city far away, a journalist opened an anonymous envelope. Inside were files, redacted documents, Black Ops reports, and a final note written in clean, even handwriting. For the ones who still believe truth is worth the silence. S6. The reporter stared at the signature for a long time. Then she smiled. Because ghosts don't fade. They evolve. And somewhere on a hill by the sea, under a rising sun, Elena Torres stopped walking just long enough to breathe. She closed her eyes and let the wind move through her, the way freedom feels when it no longer asks permission. When she opened them again, her expression was calm, resolute, because she finally understood what the general never could. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.